Today I'm going to walk through how I set up my editor VS Code as well as how I initialize brand new JavaScript projects. The first thing I do is I install a couple of extensions. The first one is Prettier, which is going to help me format on save. What that means is every time I hit Control-S, my code will be auto-formatted, and ESLint is going to provide me some additional checks. I find ESLint to be mandatory in all of my JavaScript projects. The next thing I do is I initialize an empty Git repository. As well as make my first commit. The reason I do this is I have a couple of tools that require at least one commit to be made. I add the allow empty flag on the end because I'm not actually committing any files at this time. I'm going to create an npm package.json file. All npm init does is just create this file. It's just a little convenient. The weird thing is I don't know why npm init always puts these at the bottom of the file. I feel like putting description, keyword, author, and license together makes sense. I don't know why it splits it below the main and the scripts. And actually, main we don't really need. That's for a JavaScript module. I'm not creating a module here. I'm just creating a standard node application, so we don't need that main entry point. I always like to check the name, just make sure that that's correct. I'll fill in the author. I'll create a license as well. The next things I do is I'm going to create a source directory as well as an index.js. So JavaScript projects can get a little bit verbose, especially in the main folder, in your root directory. You can tend to have a lot of JavaScript files. You start having Babel, Webpack, any sort of like CI/CD files. You can have easily 1 to 2 dozen configuration files in here. So if you're adding your JavaScripts to the root directory, it's very easy to lose them. So I always recommend creating an src directory. The entry of your application should be called either index or app. Index seems to be a little bit popular, so I always just go with index. I'm just going to create a hello world just to make sure that this is actually working. You can see as soon as I hit save, I'm going to hit Control-Z. As soon as I hit save, all of my single quotes were converted into double quotes. And I didn't even type a semicolon. I just hit Control-S, and it automatically added the semicolon for me. This is one of the things that Prettier does. It just keeps my code consistent. It's easy to have code that looks like line 1 at the top of your file, and then code that looks like line 3 buried throughout. You can see both of these are incredibly inconsistent. But if I hit Control-S, they're just brought to consistency through the Prettier plugin. So that's super awesome. Now I'm going to create a couple of node modules, or I'm going to import a couple of node modules. So before I start doing that, I'm going to create a git ignore file in the root, and I'm going to ignore the node modules directory. I'm going to end up installing probably thousands of files into this node modules, and it just doesn't make sense to have those tracked in the repository. So the first ignore you should always add is the node modules ignore. Now I can modify scripts. I'm going to create a start script. And I'm going to launch node with the file source index. If I run npm run start, I should see my hello world app. Okay, so this is the basics. Everything's mostly working. ESLint and Prettier are both really nice, and these are tools that I run in my CI/CD pipelines just to provide some analysis on the files, just to make sure everything's consistent, and it actually does catch a couple of bugs. But to do that, because my CI/CD pipeline doesn't have VS Code, I have to add these tools. I have to add the command line versions of these tools. So I'm going to npm install into the dev dependencies both Prettier and ESLint. Okay, great. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the ESLint options. And I'm looking for, I'm not sure why this is buried so far down the page, is the ESLint recommended options. That's going to be one of the first things I'm going to add. There's a couple different ways to create this file. Here is the JavaScript style that we're going to, or that they're demonstrating. I actually prefer creating YAML files for these. So I'm going to create a .eslintrc.yaml file, and that is again not going to be in the source directory but in the root. Let's see, and that's going to extend ESLint recommended. ESLint recommended is just a base set of recommended rules that they have. I find that I like to at least start with the recommended and then either enable or disable additional rules based on my project needs, because not all projects are the same. So I'm going to add a lint step here, which is just going to run the ESLint command on the source directory. I can make sure that's running by running ESLint src. You can see it has a couple of errors. Let's open this up. Here we go. We can see that the first error I'm getting is console's not defined. You can see here if I open up problems, it's going to list all of my errors, and I have this ESLint no def here. Now I know that the reason why this is happening is because ESLint is set to work in a couple different environments. Because JavaScript can run both on the server side in a node environment or on the browser side, ESLint needs to know where it's running. So I'm going to go ahead and say for this example, it's running inside of node. And let's see if I can find where all of these examples are. Okay, so here's all the different environments that we can run. Browser and node are the most common. I typically I'm going to add those. ES6 is really nice to add. If you're doing unit testing, you're going to need to add jest. So there's a couple different things in here that you'll need to specify in the environments. So now that I specified it's running in a node environment, I can go back into my hello world, and you can see that my problems have gone away. So if I run this again in the terminal, all of my errors have gone, so it successfully ran. If ESLint doesn't have any errors, it actually just won't output anything. So this means it's a success. If it did have an error after this ESLint RC, you would see that problems would pop up. But here, there's no error, so that tells me everything's good. So the next thing that I want to do is in the command line in here, I have ESLint set up, but I also want to make sure that it's following the Prettier rules. So the Prettier rules are rules like the double quotes and the semicolon that were inserted here earlier. I want to make sure that when I run ESLint, it's also compatible with Prettier. The next thing I'm going to do is install the ESLint Prettier plugin. I can find this on npm.js. I'll just search for ESLint Prettier plugin. There we go, that's the one. What this is going to do is this is going to connect ESLint and Prettier together. So ESLint is a tool, Prettier is a tool. They're separate tools made by different development teams. But they can play well together using this plugin. So I'm going to follow the installation instructions. I'm going to install the ESLint Prettier plugin, and then actually we already had ESLint, or we already had Prettier installed, so I didn't need to run that one. I'm going to go ahead and add these to my ESLint RC file. These are formatted in JSON, so I have to, I'm going to have to format these in YAML. Okay, so I've created a Prettier plugin section, and I've created a rule for Prettier. This is basically going to say, this rule is going to say any of the Prettier errors that come up, I want them to show up as an error. I could actually show them all as warnings if I don't find them that critical. But I want my CI/CD pipeline to stop. I want it to halt and just be blocking. So that's why I'm setting this to error. So I'm going to see if this runs again. So it runs. I'm going to create a Prettier error. I'm going to make sure that ESLint is running. So you can see that this is actually an ESLint error, but it's the Prettier plugin that's showing the error. So now I'm going to save without formatting. If I hit Control S here, it would just wipe out all the formatting I have and correct this mistake. But I want the mistake because I want to see that mistake in the console. So now you can see when I run npm run lint again, it's actually going to give me Prettier errors. So you can see it's going to say replace hello world with the single quotes with hello world with double quotes. So one of the really nice things about setting up Prettier with ESLint is ESLint has this fix option. So if I say npm run lint, that'll just run a check. But if I actually pass it in --fix, it'll repair the error. So you can see running it on the command line was the same as hitting Control S here. It'll actually fix all of the errors in all the files in source. So if I had hundreds of JavaScript files, this would actually go through and repair, at least what it can, all of the errors. Now you can see here in my npm run command, I added this double dash. What that means is that the CLI I'm running is the npm CLI, and this is the argument that I'm giving it, this whole thing. What I'm telling it is I'm telling it to run the lint command, which is this. if I were to pass in a flag here, if I were to omit the double dashes in the middle, this would pass the fix command to the npm CLI. That's not what we want because npm doesn't run the fix. I want to pass it to the ESLint CLI. So what this dash dash does is it just says ignore npm. The npm CLI should ignore everything after the dash, and then instead pass everything after the dash to this command. So now I can fix my files. Okay, awesome. Let's see, there's another thing that I like to do. Let's see if I could find it. Is the ESLint Prettier plugin recommended? So I have not only the ESLint recommended, but I have the Prettier recommended too. Okay, when I run this, it says it can't find the config Prettier. Oh, that's because we installed the plugin, but not the, where is it? Oh, right above it. The config. So npm install save dev ESLint config Prettier. So now our dev dependency should look like this. I have ESLint Prettier, and then I have both the config and plugin for ESLint Prettier. There we go. No errors. Now that I have my project mostly set up, even though I don't have a pipeline here, I'm going to install another tool called Husky. What Husky does is that gives us access to Git hooks. Git has a couple of different hooks. What they do is they hook into the pipeline of Git. They hook into different commands like git commit, git push. You can run commands. You can run your linter before any file gets committed to the repository. And what I mean is your local repository. The reason why I really like this is because a lot of times when these linters are set up on a remote repository, you don't know you get an error until after you've already pushed your code. So there's a lot of delay that happens between you pushing your code and then you finding out you have an error. Also, it makes you have multiple commits because you create an error and then you create a new commit afterwards that says, I'm sorry, I had to fix the linter error, and then you push it up again. So your pipeline ends up, your CI/CD pipeline on the remote ends up getting really dirty because you have all these failed messages. What Husky does is it'll make it fail, but it'll fail on your local box. So before you even make a commit message, Husky will warn you that you're about to make a mistake. So now that I've saved Husky, I'm going to search for the Husky options. You can see, just add it to your package JSON. I'm going to create a Husky section. It wants hooks. And this is the one that I really like, is the the pre-commit hook. So they're recommending, or I should say their example is showing npm test. I haven't created any tests in this project because we haven't even started writing code. But we do have our linters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say npm run lint. So every time a commit is about to happen, it's going to run the npm lint and make sure that the linter passes first. Now if I wanted to include testing later, I could do like this. I could just say double ampersand npm run test, and then that'll run the linter and also run the test. But right now, because we don't have any tests, let's just run the linter. So now I'm going to make an error in the file again. I'm going to bypass the format on save to just say save without formatting. I'm going to make sure my linter does fail. Now if I make a commit message here and I say this is my my second commit, what I'm hoping to see here is that my Husky pre-commit hook is going to run my npm lint, and it's going to prevent me from making this second commit here. Okay, that looks good. So I ran my command. I see it ran my ESLint RC. I got an error message. Let me check my Git to make sure. And here we go. I only have my one commit. So now I'll just go in, correct the error, make my second commit. Oh, yeah, it would help if I added some files, right? So I'm going to commit these. Second commit. Everything passes. And there's my second commit. So this is awesome. I have ESLint set up, I have my Prettier set up, and I have Husky set up. So you can see when I was attempting to run Husky, or when I was attempting to make a commit with an invalid syntax, at least according to my rules, Husky completely prevented that. So the nice thing about that is normally without Husky I would have had my second commit, which would have had some errors in the CI/CD pipeline, so I would have had to make a third commit. So now because of that, I'm catching these errors before they make it into my CI/CD pipeline. So let me check a couple of other things. So ESLint, ESLint by default is very restricted. So you can see here, this is a common one that I see right after installing ESLint. Const is reserved with ESLint. And the reason why that's happening is because ESLint is restricted to a really low level. So even though it says node, we'll have to also add some other rules to say that ES6 is okay. So now we can see the rules of, or the error has gone away off of const, but now it's back on something and 1, 2, 3. Actually, the 1, 2, 3 error is just a Prettier error, so if I hit Control S. So this is one thing that I use all the time with ESLint, is I make sure that this no unused vars is always on. A lot of times you're going to see these things in the files, and you're going to want to determine, is this supposed to be used somewhere? And if it's not, you can just kill it. So this is going to highlight a lot of dead code that you aren't using anywhere. So I use this no unused vars all the time to detect unused code. Another thing I can do is if I kill this, and I were to type out code like that, it's going to tell me no undef. So again, this is also telling me this is catching an error. I'm trying to use this variable, but it doesn't exist. Now if I add both of them together, you can see there's no problems. So a lot of times I'm going to see these two error messages work together when I have something like this. And I have them misspelled. So I might not be able to catch this just by looking at them, but now because they're both underscored with this red squiggly error line, I can see something's not right here. Like I see this and it's not used, and I see this and it's not defined. That's going to help me figure out where errors are in my code before I even start running my code. So I can see, okay, something's wrong here and something's wrong here. Oh, it's just a misspelling. So now if I were to copy this and paste it here, this completely goes away. So I'm going to check one more thing. I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call the function. I'm going to hit save, and so now this is another thing I've noticed, another gotcha with Prettier and ESLint, or actually with Prettier. So if you see here, I did format on save. I can check this by just creating some funky code, hitting Control-S, and you see it formats. But for some reason, it's still showing this Prettier error. And I discovered this is a new change with Prettier 2. So you can see here I'm using Prettier 2. There's an incompatibility between the Prettier plugin, the Prettier code formatter, and the Prettier npm package. The VS Code likes to format a single value without parentheses. So if I were to put parentheses, you can see the error goes away because it's following the Prettier rules of 2.0. But if I were to hit save, that activates the plugin, the VS Code plugin, and it's going to remove this. So to solve this mystery, I actually found out it's because of the way Prettier works in 2.0. One of the breaking changes they made is they set the arrow parens to be always. So all you have to do is create a .prettierrc.yaml file and set your arrow parens. So there's a couple different options. If you want it to be consistent with the Prettier 2.0 style, just add arrow parens always. And now when I hit Control-S, now it's going to be formatted correctly. And if you want to see what the other Prettier options are, just Google Prettier options. You can see the arrow parens always formats your code like this. a void formats it like this. So if I want to go back to if I want to go back to the 1.0 style, I can just hit save. It'll go back to 1.0. Otherwise, it doesn't matter, so I'll just go with the 2.0 style. If you want to see what else you can do with Prettier, it's always the quotes. Where is it? Single quote. Oh, there it is. So if I want to convert my style to single quotes, I can do that. Semicolons. Turn semicolons off. And the nice thing about this is if I were to do npm run lint fix, it'll make those changes in every file under the source directory. I only have one file right now. Let's just run it and see. Yep, my double quotes come back and the semicolons come back as well as. Okay, well that's everything. That's how I set up my VS Code. That's how I start all of my new projects. Of course, if you have questions about this, just hit me up on Twitter. My username is @joelnet, Joelnet. See you next time. Bye.